Welcome to the celebration of a major scientific advance.
We have made a major advancement in our understanding.
We have a great discovery that has a potential for helping a lot of people.
There is no question that it's the cutting edge of science.
Absolutely wonderful. Wow, I'm impressed.
No question that it will help ease suffering. No question that it's a spectacular achievement that will bring some people joy, and absolutely no question that it makes some fear for their people's future.
It's just the fact that all these babies or fetuses that are okay, except for the fact they're short stature. You know, what's going to happen to them?
Tonight, the dark side of genetic testing. Where do you draw the line? Yogi Berra didn't say it, but he could have. Life would be a whole lot simpler if all the choices weren't so complicated. Take genetics. In about a decade, scientists will have deciphered the 60 to 100,000 genes that make humans what they are. That means it'll be possible to know nearly everything about the genetic makeup of a baby before it's born. An expectant couple could know if their newborn will be predisposed to heart disease or depression or cancer. Already, many parents face a painful choice if they learn there is Down syndrome present or anencephaly, a fetus without a brain. And even in those cases, a decision to abort the pregnancy can be hard for many and impossible for some. But suppose, just suppose, that the doctor comes to you and says, congratulations, 7 months from now, you're going to have a healthy child. There are no life-threatening medical problems, no neurological problems either. Oh, by the way, the doctor says, there is one other thing you should know. The child is going to be short, real short, a dwarf. Then what do? Here's ABC's Robert Krulwich.
Pretty soon, about maybe second, third grade, other kids started growing more than me. And then my mom told me that I was small. So I said, well, how big will I be? She said, well, I don't know, but not too big.
Most dwarves are genetic accidents. Two average-sized people have a baby, and because of a tiny error in the DNA, the baby is born and remains a dwarf.
When I transferred schools, it was pretty hard because nobody knew me, and I didn't have any friends, and a lot of people made fun of me. But after a while, it just got a lot better.
Here comes the bus! Come on, you guys!
Mark's parents could not have known he was going to be a dwarf, because when this film was made in the 80s, scientists hadn't yet found the gene for the most common form of dwarfism, so there was no test a pregnant woman could take. But now there is. Dr. John Wasmuth discovered the gene in 1994.
I want to find out about this. What? Let me get down here so I can ask you. What is this?
This is my DNA, the picture of me.
Dee Miller coordinates a clinical service for dwarves out of Johns Hopkins Hospital.
Okay, and the difference here is this is one person and another person, and there you are under the star.
Right.
And you have these two extra little bumps.
It's a different mutation.
And and it's a teeny tiny thing.
Mm-hmm.
But now the doctors can see that teeny thing in a 10-week-old fetus. For the first time, it is possible to avoid a potential disaster. When two dwarves decide to have a baby, there's a 25% chance the child will have a lethal condition and certain early death. But with the test, dwarves can discover this problem very early in a pregnancy, which for many of them is an extraordinary benefit. But along with the benefit, some dwarves argue these tests one day could create a nightmare. Because once a dwarf fetus can be predicted, then unhealthy and healthy dwarves can be avoided. On dwarf email on the internet, dwarves write in, these tests could eliminate us altogether. They talk about wiping out dwarfism, the genocide of little people. I keep hearing, writes one, let's rid ourselves of this burden. This burden is my life.
That wasn't so bad, was it?
The fear is that once prenatal testing becomes available, parents will want to screen for kinds of conditions, and dwarfism will be on that list.
Our society, our health insurance
etc., would choose to screen for this. It's not a great stretch. Plus,
screen for it and then eliminate you?
Why else would they screen for it?
If you identify the dwarf as the undesirable other with prenatal testing, then it permits you to eliminate the other, and therefore it devalues those people who do live as dwarfs because somehow they escaped.
Last year, when I was in 5th grade, towards the end of the year, a lot of people started thinking I was spoiled and I couldn't do anything for myself. So I had a talk with my mom, and she just said to try to do as much as possible for yourself. So I've really tried to do that this year, and it's gotten a lot better. They started to like me now, and they haven't complained that I'm spoiled anymore.
It is painful, say many adult dwarfs, that just as dwarfism is better understood and life's getting a little easier, especially for the kids, that just now the tests may make life harder. These tests make dwarfs predictable and therefore preventable, and for some, that raises a question.
Why are you here when you could have been,
You should have been prevented.
Right.
You should have been prevented.
It's like a disease. We can prevent it. Why are you here?
Right now, there is no across-the-board genetic test for 50 or 60 different problems. That's a ways off. But if there were such a test, would people really terminate pregnancies for conditions like dwarfism? Or suppose they find out their baby's going to be, well, just short, or say a girl instead of a boy. Wouldn't doctors and genetic counselors say, well, you can't do that? This is a subject that Dorothy Wirtz at the Shriver Center in Massachusetts has been studying for more than 10 years.
It's about geneticists' ethical views.
Her team interviews geneticists and presents them with hypothetical situations, like what, for example?
All right, the most controversial case was sex selection. This is in 1985.
What does sex selection mean?
It's choosing the sex of the child you're going to have, because you want that sex. And we posed the case of a couple with 4 daughters who want a son. And they tell the geneticist that if they find out it's a female fetus, they'll have an abortion.
Because they really want a boy.
They really want a boy.
So how many geneticists in 1985 said that they would help parents possibly terminate a pregnancy just to choose between a healthy boy and a healthy girl?
In the United States, more than any other country in the world, geneticists were willing to honor this request.
What proportion of the geneticists in America would honor the request?
62% would do prenatal diagnosis or offer a referral.
That's high.
That's what we thought.
Did you ask this question again in the 1990s?
Yes, we did.
And has the number gone up from where it was?
It's increased.
If genetic counselors would help parents terminate a baby that's the wrong gender, what message does that send to dwarves? Soon, size could be a reason to end a pregnancy. And by the way, why are counselors so willing to do whatever parents ask?
I'm quite startled by it. What could they possibly have in mind? They could think that, I know what they probably have in mind. We in America have made somewhat of a fetish of autonomy.
It's true.
Anything at all in the family history in terms of handicaps or birth defects?
Many Americans, when they sit down with a genetic counselor to discuss their baby, value their right to choose and their privacy. And genetic counselors are taught to honor the parent's choice, whatever it is.
I think you have to leave it to the parents. Now,
Why do you have to leave it to the parent? Why can't you say, no, no, no?
Because you're not in that person's position. You're not in their culture.
And interestingly, both Dee Miller and her friend Dr. Judy Badner agree. Would they support a ban or a law or restrictions on genetic tests?
I don't think so.
You don't think so either?
Mm-mm.
Nope, they say the way the dwarves will survive long-term is to be accepted as you are for what you are. So when parents discover that they're carrying a dwarf child, they'll say, fine. Well, that's not going to be easy. But then It's never been easy.
Okay, see you later, Mom.
If genetic screening means that one day there will be fewer dwarves, or perhaps even fewer people that are different in all sorts of ways, those at risk say, not without a fight. The battle plan in a moment.
Okay, this is the little boy we just got in. He's from Seoul, Korea. He's only 2 months old.
Some dwarfs worry that one day mothers everywhere will take a genetic screening test and find out early if they're going to have a dwarf. And if that happens, there may be a lot fewer dwarfs in the world.
This is the White family. They just love children, and they'd have more if they'd let them, I think.
But Nancy Rockwood is prepared. She runs a worldwide adoption agency for dwarfs. She has a 1-800-ADOPT number, and she has customers.
This is one of our younger couples that adopted. That's the Juday family. That's Tricia and Lauren May. When the girls aren't fighting, they're the best of friends.
And as it happens, Dr. Judy Badner is thinking of adopting right now.
Are you going to use Nancy's service?
Mm-hmm.
So have you called her up yet? I never don't answer that
You
question.
really are forcing me to make a commitment.
No.
Well, that is one way to keep the dwarf population up, aggressively adopting every available dwarf baby. But there is another approach. If it turns out parents feel free to abort dwarves, dwarf parents might feel free to abort average-sized fetuses to favor dwarfs.
I mean, I think if the option is open to average-sized people, it should be open to dwarfs.
Judy wouldn't do it, but Dorothy Wirtz says she was asked to consult on just such a case.
I have heard anecdotally, yes, of such cases.
She wouldn't give us the details, but we wondered if such a procedure is morally defensible. It's one thing for adults to make decisions about their own lives, says ethicist Nancy Dubler.
The question is, do we let them make those decisions about their children's lives?
After all, not all dwarfs are pleased to be dwarfs. They are stared at and made fun of. They have back and health and adjustment problems, particularly as kids. One dwarf wrote on the internet, "If my parents chose to make me a dwarf, I would find it very hard to forgive them for the crap I had to put up with growing up." And kids aren't the only ones who might question a pro-dwarf strategy. What about insurance companies? With a genetic test, you know ahead of time if a child is going to have health problems and be more expensive.
Do you cost more than other people?
For insurance companies, yes, and on the average, and it would vary with the type of dwarfism.
Oh, so you could well imagine a businessman saying, you guys are not only different, but you're a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
You cost more than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, but we could cost more.
Exactly.
It's a scary reality for a dwarf to face, but it's a much scarier, or as scary a reality for society to face, that we will be able to value and rank the lives of people who are different than the majority.
And then where do we draw the line? If a geneticist tells you your baby will have a bad brain, or a failing heart, or a weak left hand, or an ugly nose, or the wrong colored hair, where do you say, well, even so, this baby should live? And where are dwarves? Above the line or below? This is Robert Krulwich for Nightline.
Joining me now in our Washington studio is Paul Stephen Miller. Paul Miller is a commissioner at the Equal Opportunity Commission here in Washington, and he is also, well, what's the right word? Is dwarf the right word?
Yes, I am a dwarf or a little person.
And if you're a dwarf or a little person, then what am I?
You are average size.
Let's talk a bit about these personal questions, I think, for a moment. You know, it's easy to be glib and say this is morally indefensible and this is wrong and this is that, but it must be an extraordinarily difficult moment for a parent to first hear that news. Do you know how your parents reacted?
Well, I think it came as very much as a surprise for my parents after I was born to be told you have a healthy son and he's a dwarf. And I think it's that moment of sort of revelation about what your child is going to be that is really important, that really sets the context for how a parent will react.
Now take it up the next step. You're engaged to a woman of average size.
Yes.
You plan to have kids?
Yes, we do.
You've talked about this issue?
Yeah, we have.
Could go either way.
It could go either way. We can either have an average-sized child or a dwarf child.
And how do you look at it? Do you care?
I don't really care myself. I think it's, I feel that I can connect with either a dwarf child or with an average-sized child. Growing up in the average-sized world and in an average-sized family, all of my siblings and both of my parents were average-sized, and living in an average-sized world, I feel a connection to that. But I also feel a connection to having somebody as a child who is a dwarf. I know what that's like.
And it would be easier, wouldn't it, on the child, not better, but easier if the child were average sized. Do you think about it that way?
I think in some senses it could be easier because of society's pressures and society. But on the other hand, it might be easier for a child